We are podcastvideos.com. Our goal is to educate, enlighten, engage, and entertain. We believe in the power of love and transformation through storytelling.
Welcome back, everybody, to Story Scaling. I'm Dan Kraft, the editorial director here at podcastvideos.com. And instead of bringing the rest of our crew in today, we've got a local legend. Admit it, Kyle. It's true. Kyle Kellams is the news director.
I am news director, yes.
Our local NPR affiliate here in town. And he's also the producer of Ozarks at Large, which is a twice daily hour long.
Right. So it's on 6 days a week, twice a day, Monday through Friday. But the 7 o'clock is basically a rebroadcast of noon.
So the 10 o'clock show is not completely different than the 7 o'clock show.
Right. So the news show's at noon. Occasionally, if something happens, we change it at 7. But
cool.
Yeah.
So I've known Kyle for a great many years now. You just celebrated a milestone over at KUAF,
35 years at KUAF.
That's a long time in one place.
I don't like change. I
have to admit, though, I did the math, and I've been in journalism of some kind or another for 24 now. So you don't have to feel too bad.
Good. Thank you.
So we've known each other for years. Obviously, Kyle's been sticking the radio microphone in everyone's face he can find for years. And I started out as a print guy in what used to be known as newspapers. Trust me, they were a thing.
They were a really cool thing.
They were.
Yes.
I'd never made much money doing it, but you know this because your wife actually was in print.
Yes, she was. She was a political reporter for about 15 years now.
Yeah. So when I started in this business, Kyle, and when you started this business, there were very established verticals.
Yeah.
You were radio.
And that was it.
I was print.
Right.
People who sat at desks like this were broadcast.
Right.
There's been such a muddling of the idea of content creation anymore. Content creation wasn't even a phrase we used back then. Now NPR, of which you're affiliated, is a major podcast outlet.
Right. Right.
And they have been for quite some time because podcasting really started as a heavily audio. Radio is easy to repackage.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have cameras, there's one less thing to edit. So audio and podcasts, of course, started with audio only. NPR was pretty quick in getting into that. And the people who were in charge of NPR at the time saw what was happening. And really, podcasting has helped radio, I think, because of, there are people who would have never listened to radio. Oh, podcast, audio. And then NPR recognized the relationship and got in pretty quickly.
It was radio on demand.
Right,
you
right.
Didn't have to find your 1 hour time block.
Right.
Today, I missed Kyle.
No appointment listening required. Exactly.
The folks at the newspaper didn't necessarily see that coming. Maybe not the only thing they didn't see coming in terms of technology. We did have one guy who they let try it back in about 2006.
Probably a little too early.
A little too early. The equipment wasn't great. The editing process was arduous, to say the least. And really, we should have had somebody with a radio background who at least knew the audio editing. But now, obviously, even podcasting was very much a radio-type audio medium. Right. Maybe not so much anymore.
Well, I think it can be... there are still, if you look at the most listened to podcasts, New York Times has The Daily, WNYC has Today Explained. There are still some very popular, because if you're driving,
sure,
or you're running,
or you aren't trying to look at something.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there's always going to be a room for audio only, but what you can do with visuals just, exponentially opens up doors.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I don't think it'll ever go to the point where everybody has a video.
Right. Because it does add, it's both, right? It adds another element for your patrons, but it adds another element for your cost and
for your advertisers.
Right. Yeah.
Quite a few things. Also, it puts you on YouTube. You can upload YouTube with just a static image. YouTube doesn't necessarily like it as much,
right.
But there's a common conception around that if you're not on YouTube, you're not really on the internet.
Right. Yeah.
So also I noticed, and this is fresh today, I don't know if you've seen this on your news wires, Apple Podcasts, obviously very tied in with the whole Apple closed ecosystem, just put out a web browser that will allow Apple Podcasts on Windows and Android.
So happy to hear that. I'm so happy.
Are you an Android guy yourself?
No, I'm an Apple guy, but I just spread it out.
It's like the biggest peace offering between Windows and Apple forever, but it may have just started a shooting war between Apple and Spotify.
Of course it did. They're shooting with bigger guns than I own, so have at it.
So, but the idea of just not only repurposing content, but the creation is not what it used to be. There's so many folks that are working within multiple verticals instead of very typical, very, very focused outlets.
Right. Well, I think the challenge for someone of my age is to think like that. If you've been in a very strict vertical world for most of your career, I'll admit it, I'm thinking radio first, and I'm having to do a shift. Well, I want to reach as many people as I can with our stories and interviews, but it takes people, right? I mean,
it takes resources.
It takes resources, and I don't think everyone understands that when they think they want to get into a podcast. It's like, yeah, anyone can do a podcast, right? I can do it with my phone.
Sure.
But do you want people to hear it? Do you want people to see it? Then you gotta know what you're doing, or have someone who knows what they're doing help you.
The biggest pain points we hear from people are they don't want to learn the editing software because it's a steep learning curve.
Yeah, especially with the video.
And the video makes it worse.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that the recording is the easy part. Right. It's promoting it afterwards.
Oh my gosh, exactly.
It's getting your social media out there. It's getting your marketing to make sure that you are reaching someone.
Because it all has to work together. I just came out of a meeting at KUAF where we're trying to figure this out. How do you do that with limited sources? But you've got to let people know you can have the best content in the world, Dan. But if people don't know where to find it, right?
Yeah.
What's the point? You've got to, you have to hit everything.
You can't be buried in the very back of the bookstore. You've got to be out on the shelf in front of people.
And like you said, seemingly everyone's creating content and wants to. And of course, I think the first thing you want to do is, what do I want to achieve with this? Am I trying to make money? Am I trying to reach a niche audience? Know your goals, but then know that you're going to have to work a lot of different avenues.
This is not a get-rich-quick setup. It's really not.
No.
I mean, it may not as bad as newspapers or public radio, but it's still not going to be right.
And everyone, well, what about Joe Rogan? Or what about, those are the success rates, if that, right? Yeah.
Somebody said you need 50-something downloads in the first 7 days to make your podcast a top half. It's like 5,000 puts you in the top 1%. Wow. So there's not a whole lot of people just making cheddar here.
There's a lot of hustle involved.
There's a lot of hobbyists. I've been to a couple of local meetups where these people don't have a goal to really make a living at it. They just want to get their opinion or their point of view on a particular thing out there. Some of them are interviewing local chefs because they care about the local food community.
Right.
An old friend of ours, Jonathan Williams, used to work at the paper. He and a buddy do horror movie reviews, like B, maybe even C level horror movie reviews. And they're not going, that's a very niche audience.
Right.
They don't spend a whole lot of time promoting it. It's just something they do for fun, really.
And then and the fun of that is someone will see it and connect with you, but they're not trying to get rich. They're not trying to get in that top half.
Right.
Yeah. And that's great.
So you talk about reach, obviously putting things on YouTube. YouTube can tell if you have a static image or not. And their algorithm is, sometimes it thinks that's cool. Sometimes they want to ding you for it. We spent years chasing the Google algorithm for written content. You've been beaming out at 100,000 watts.
100,000 watts. So we basically get to Tahlequah. Our studio's in Fayetteville. The tower is south, close to Brentwood in Washington County. So we can get to Tahlequah to the west, Russellville, more or less to the south parts of Russellville, almost Harrison, or into downtown Harrison East, in like Neosho, Missouri to the north.
Okay.
And there's some
we're talking
spots in
about
there.
all of northwestern Arkansas,
Yes.
down to the River Valley,
River
all the way
Valley.
into Missouri, and well into Oklahoma.
Yeah.
For those of you who may not be as local.
Yes.
So, Tahlequah is not, as far as I'm aware, a great tourism destination, but maybe some
The Cherokee Nation there.
There you go.
Pretty cool museums. Yeah.
So, now you've always been FM.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
KUAF started at FM.
FM student-run station 51 years ago, so January 73, 10-watt station student-run. And then over the time, incrementally went up.
Just boost that power.
Yeah.
Well, now, in the AM days, though, reach was just about how big a transmitter you had.
Right.
You could boom WGN out of Chicago, and you're broadcasting Cubs games that people are picking up in New Mexico if, if the weather's correct. But it was all about power for the reach, not frequency.
You know, there was this KAY in Little Rock. They had a show, a blues show, then later Bleecker Street, that people would hear in Detroit. Because AM signals, of course, work differently than FM signals. But,
Sure.
But basically, if you were on a clear channel or a near clear channel radio station, you would have a clear path. And at night, those signals would really reach. FM is a lot more regulated in that.
It's geographically fenced.
Right. And
yes.
our signal at noon is the same as our signal at midnight.
Yeah. I just remember growing up outside of Detroit. I don't actually remember. I was too young, but there was a large antenna dish for, listening to signals from outer space. Mm-hmm. But in the AM radios in my parents' cars, depending on the weather and where that thing was turned, as they drove by it, it'd be 2 feet of snow on the ground in Detroit, and they'd be getting Miami's weather updates.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cable TV came along and did some of the same things. There are Braves fans across the country.
Right.
Can you tell Kyle and I both kind of have a thing for baseball?
Yes.
Because of Ted Turner.
Yes.
Yeah. He started putting those games on a station that didn't just reach Atlanta or Georgia. It reached cross country.
Yeah.
So now we're redefining reach. We're redefining creation.
Well, reach is everything, right? If you can get on YouTube or, anywhere, if you can get your podcast up, your reach is
nearly unlimited.
Yeah.
It's everybody who has an interest in your topic.
right.
That's about the only platform.
If they can find you, if they know you exist. Yeah, exactly.
The guy who wants to talk specifically about a 48 Packard isn't going to bring in a whole lot of, suburban moms.
Right.
But he's going to get that reach absolutely as far as he can by being out there as particular.
His potential is wide.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, there have been a few great new things that turned out not to be. You guys went hard into digital radio. I remember this. And I think that the station's
still there. They're still there. That came around about the same time as satellite radio. And we, in the industry, saw satellite radio as a much bigger threat than it turned out to be. I mean, satellite radio is still there, but they have churn in subscribers. I mean, they've plateaued pretty much. And I won't say it doesn't affect us, because if you're an XM Sirius subscriber and you only want to hear blues, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
You get
it 24/7 as opposed to the 2 hours you guys put.
Right. The churn, I think, comes from the subscription.
Sure.
I mean, when subscriptions come up. But digital radio was supposed to be the antidote to that. And it was kind of precipitated on everyone buying in, everyone in the radio industry. We have 2 digital channels. There's a station in Bella Vista that has one. The city of Louisville, the stations in Louisville really went into it. And I think they all exist.
Of all places, Louisville.
Yeah, well, I mean, had it worked, I think, the way that some of us thought it would have been this kumbaya if radio stations get together. Let's make digital radio a thing.
Yeah.
Right? So
this is like
all are doing digital
AM to FM
stations.
transition.
Exactly. It was exactly that. And so, with our digital too, it's 24/7 classical. It's a piped-in service. It doesn't cost us much.
Why not put it out there as an offer?
Right. And for a long time, we had a lot of classical music on the daytime. Classical music is great, but it's not an audience builder. Because when public radio started, it wasn't about building an audience, right? It was like providing things that weren't anywhere else. But as expenses came up and started, it's like, well, we're a business too. So we started. So classical music for us doesn't start till 8 o'clock at the earliest. So there's a 24/7 classical station. There's KUAF3 is mostly jazz and a few other things. we haven't put a lot of resources or time into them because there's not a lot back. Those are also available as digital. So you can go to KUAF.com and get it, and it's all free. But no, digital radio did not take off like the FCC and the radio industry had hoped.
But KUAF does now have a fairly prominent spot on their website that says, here's our podcasts.
Yes. And we have podcasts that we produce in-house. We have some that we distribute. Some like I Am Northwest Arkansas with Randy Wilburn. He comes in, does it there. We produce it there. And, I think we'd like to, there are NPR and public radio examples and individual stations who are doing some podcasts that are pretty interesting that I think we would like to maybe kind of follow that lead. And I think what we're thinking about is podcasts that aren't going to start as in perpetuity.
These are limited series.
Exactly.
Things.
And I think, what's our goal?
Now
what
we're
story
back
do you
into
want to tell?
some cable TV type ideas.
Right. Ozarks at Large is a podcast, but it's produced as a radio show and then just repackaged. I think we would like to go into a few more things. And it's got a long shelf life, but if it's a podcast about how Northwest Arkansas has changed over the last 30 years.
And for those of you who are local, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Maybe we can do that over 7 episodes. I think. And
maybe you go back 3 years later and revisit it. But it's not something you keep up with week to week in what we would think of as a deadline situation.
Exactly. And maybe, this is wild, of course. This is the golden ring. But you think about Serial when it started. It was going to be a one and done. That it was wildly successful, and they did more editions. And there are more and more podcasts like that.
Yep.
It's like Fargo on television. Season 5 doesn't have the same actors as season 4 or 3, but you're telling a narrative. Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of these podcasts, Smartless is the one that comes to mind. These are people who the easiest way to get famous in podcasting is still to already be famous for something else.
Exactly.
And these people who were just wanted to communicate with their friends, trapped at home during the pandemic, started on not even a money-making project, no vanity projects here, just something to do because they were bored.
Right.
And it's outlived the pandemic and grown beyond anything they thought it could have been.
And the story there is, because I've heard people say, well, those guys on Smartless, all they do is talk. A, they're all smart. B, they're all proven entertainers. C, their guests are their friends who are also pretty famous and interesting.
And have their own sense of story.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a high bar. Nothing wrong being a hobbyist and getting together with a couple of buddies and doing it.
But they don't have the name recognition that those guys do.
Right.
And we haven't convinced any of them to show up in the studio here yet, so we're working on it.
And did you watch the Smartless HBO? Was it HBO? Yeah, it was Max.
I haven't seen it yet. It's on my list.
It's interesting.
I haven't even gotten through all the episodes yet. I stumbled across them late, and so I've picked up a few here and there, but listening to them talk to Eugene Levy about just the Canadian scene.
Yes.
Early on, Aykroyd, and, both Lucy and John Candy, some of the guys who were up there. So the younger kids may not exactly know who they were talking about, but for somebody even my age, that's classic.
Did you listen to Strike Force 5? That was the one during the writer's strike with all the late night hosts?
Yep.
Great.
And a wonderful way for the performers to kind of gig it to corporate and be like, hey, we can be content tech writers outside of these supposedly ironclad contracts we've signed with you.
But then again, here were 5 wildly funny, talented people, and they could pull it off.
Yeah. Some junior screenwriter from B-list movies in Pasadena that nobody's ever heard of wouldn't have had that same pull.
There's a reason I'm not involved with podcasts with 4 of my friends because
you like your friends.
And we can get together and do that. Yeah.
And you can even come hang out here if you like.
Well, no, I'm just saying I don't know how many other people would be interested in the 5 of us talking. I think, again, getting back to what's your goal with a podcast.
You think you could even get all 5 of your wives to listen to that?
All 5 of my wives?
All the 5, you and your friends' wives.
Oh, I was going to say, I only have one wife.
That's an entirely different podcast starting.
I don't know what you're asking. No, probably not. We couldn't get all 5. I don't think so.
I have 6 siblings. I doubt if I put one out, they would all tune in even once.
Well, and that brings up, and this is way afield, I'm sorry, but it's also getting into podcasting or any kind of content sharing, you have to check your ego because it'll get checked for you.
Oh, yes.
I mean, not everyone wants to hear you. And even the people that want to hear you don't have time.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
That's the wonder of being able to download it to your phone and
Yes.
just carry it with you. And
Yes.
you don't have to be near the radio. You don't have to
Right.
be, we have, remember math class growing up that told you, you have to learn this. You won't always have a calculator in your pocket, and they were wrong. But now with ChatGPT, our English teachers were wrong.
Right.
And now we've got every reel-to-reel TV without a remote. It's all right here.
Yeah. Actually, my math classes, they didn't tell us that because we didn't have calculators yet. But whatever.
Okay, the abacus. So,
You're not always going to have the app. I bet there's an Abacus app.
oh, I'm sure there's probably 20 of them.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to have to look that up.
Yes,
Rick.
yeah.
So, but Kyle, this has been wonderful.
I hope I helped you tell something.
Yes, I think we've informed people without sounding like we were lecturing them. It's
Good. I thought you were.
that's TED Talks.
Yes.
Wheelhouse. We like to entertain a little, but leave them with nuggets of knowledge.
Okay.
So
It's been a blast for me.
yeah, it's always good. Always good to see you. Thanks for being here.
You bet.
This is Kyle Kellams, good guy, KUAF, our local PR affiliate, and he is the producer of Ozarks at Large, local radio guru for 35 years now, and he joined us for Story Scaling. I'm Dan Kraft, the editorial director here at podcastvideos.com. Be sure to check out the website, which, ironically, podcastvideos.com, for the interview with Kyle and other industry experts. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.